Hi everyone, I hope you're doing good. My name is Mr. J.M. Kimani, a lecturer in Management Accounting. Welcome to Lesson 3 of Costing Methods topic. Now in Lesson 3, having covered and introduced process costing, now we are going to look at process costing with the work in progress. Now, initially, like in lesson 2, we focused on process costing without work in progress, and we're able to do and open accounts like process account, like process 1, 2, 3 account. We have abnormal gain, abnormal loss, normal loss accounts. Those we were able to open and understood how the procedure and the steps we follow. Now we want to look at the work in progress. Now in process costing with work in progress, we are required to understand what is work in progress, at the same time how we account for this work in progress. In industries where process of manufacturing is continuous, some units may be incomplete at the end of the period. The problem arises in the unit cost as for the units that are completed. The solution to this problem is to express output in terms of equivalent units. Equivalent units are assumed complete units of output from a production process. If a single unit is started and completed before another is started. Now we are saying that the easiest we can do is to ensure that as we are having some physical units on the input, if we are having and balancing it with the physical output, some units are going to be incomplete. Then what we do is to determine the equivalent units. Say, for example, you have completed them halfway, 50% complete, and they are, let's say, like they are 300 units. So instead of us saying 300 units which are actual, we talk of half of the 300, which is 150. So we'll talk of 150 equivalent units that have been complete, even though actually it is 300 units which have been done halfway. That's what we mean by the equivalent units. This is based on percentage of completion of output. For example, if 10,000 units were started, but only 8,000 units were completed, and the remainder were left in work in progress, with 60% degree of completion, then the equivalent units, which will be used for cost calculation, will be given as follows. So we do have, so these are the inputs. This is 10,000 units. Then we have units completed, or the complete units. This is 8,000 units. And then we do have the work in progress. There are some units which are not complete, which are 2,000. This is 2,000 units. So instead of us using the 2,000 units, since they have been completed 60%, then we take the equivalent units of them to be 60%. Like now we say that the equivalent is 60% of 2,000, which is 1,200. So that now we can talk of the output in terms of equivalent units this way. So total equivalent units is now 9,200. You see, physically it may not balance because 9,200 is not the total output. Total output should be 10,000 units. But now, the problem is that these units, which is 2,000, that would have balanced with 8 to give us 10,000, are not yet complete. But if we take 1,200, that will actually be presumably the units that have been completed. So 60% has been done. So 40% has not been done. So we better work with the 1,200 in place of 2,000. So now we can be able to add these two, and we talk of 9,200. Now, supposing, just an example, suppose we have the cost of output. If cost of output is, let's say, shillings, say 1 or either shillings, let's say 920,000. If this is the cost of output, shillings 920,000, then should you want to know the cost per unit? So you say cost per unit should be now the total cost, we divide by not the total output, but now the equivalent units. For example, the total cost would be 920,000. You divide by the equivalent units, which are 9,200. And this now shall give us a cost of shillings, is it 10 or 100 shillings? Yeah, we have shillings 100. Now, what does it tell you? It tells you that if you never used the equivalent units and you used the output to balance with the input, which is 10,000, if you divide this one by 10,000, it's like saying that the cost shall be 92 shillings. But remember, not all units have actually shared this cost of 920,000. Only those units that have been worked on. So the part that has not been worked on has no share in the 920. So therefore, it's only 9,200 units that have been worked on and whose cost is 920,000. That's why we are dividing by same and we get the 100 shillings. That's how we do for the equivalent units. Now, the cost incurred in a process are not incurred uniformly, and therefore equivalent units will not be based on the same percentage of completion. That is, output in a process will carry different degrees of completion for equivalent units calculation, which is true. Like these completed units, they are at 100% complete. But these 2,000 units are not 100% complete. They are 60% complete. So that is now a mixture of percentages. And as long as we're able to get the equivalent units, then things become simpler for us. Now, the cost items that are in a process in process are 1, transfer in cost, 2, material added in the process, and 3, conversion cost. Now, of course, the transfer in cost, these are the costs of the materials or the products which have been transferred from a previous process. Let's say we're talking about in process 2. So the costs that we incurred in process 1 to complete units that now are transferred to process 2, that cost is what we call the transfer in cost. Then in this process, which is process 2, we are going to have some materials added in this process. We'll be having some conversion costs like the labor costs, and we have also the overheads. Now, the transfer in cost, we can say that it happens at the beginning of the process. But the material added, the labor cost, and the overheads depends. When do we incur these expenses? Material added may be added throughout the period, or may be added at the beginning of the period, or may be added at the end of the period. It depends with what product is it and the process of the product, how it is manufactured. There are some that we add materials at the beginning. If it's like timber, we must have timber at the beginning because we'll be working on the timber to get now the product. But there are others where maybe the materials come later after the process, but not in many occasions. Now, the labor may be incurred uniformly, but there are some cases where the labor is a lot at the beginning of the production, but we have less labor at the end of the production. Overheads, maybe like the cost of electricity and some other and such expenses may be incurred uniformly, and the others which you may incur more at the beginning and maybe less at the end. But for simplicity purpose, we normally presume that the conversion cost, the labor and overheads, are normally incurred uniformly. So that now, if we complete a product at 60%, then we will say that we have only used 60% labor on that product. 60% of the expenses or the overheads on that product. That is how we normally assume. Now, accounting for opening work in progress. Accounting for opening work in progress. So accounting for opening work in progress. Now that tells you it is units in the same process that were not completed previously, and now this time we meet them. So the question is, how do we regard these units? Do we regard them as specific units with identity, or do we mix them with the other units that we are bringing on board fresh this period? Now, the issue of opening work in progress is about period. In the same account or in the same process, so at the beginning of the process and at the end of the process. If at the end of the process there are some units which are not completed, they remain in the same process, and in the next period, in the same process, we'll begin with them. We'll be having them in the process account. Now, where there is opening work in progress, the cost data relates to two production periods. That is, the previous period's cost for opening and the current period cost for the work started this period. That's true. So there are two costs. There is cost that we incurred in the previous period for that opening work in progress, which in that period it was a closing work in progress, and there is now the fresh cost we are incurring this period on the same units anyway that we are incurring this period. That is the point. Now, there are two methods which can be used in accounting for work in progress, namely, we have weighted average method, and there is first in, first out method. So there is two methods. We have the weighted average method, and there is the first in, first out method. So this is the WAM, and you have the FIFO methods. These are the two methods, weighted average method and the FIFO methods. Now, in weighted average methods, there will be no distinction between inputs of opening, work in progress, and what was transferred in the periods. They will be treated as if they were started at the same time. The units of output from the process will be assumed to have come from the same batch of input of opening, work in progress, and transfer in stock. The cost to account for will relate to the cost incurred in the two periods. That is, the cost will also be assumed to have been incurred in the same period. Now, this is what I mean, that in weighted average methods, we do have the two periods, what we did last period and what we are doing this period. So we are going to ensure that the opening work in progress is going to lose identity, so that now we can relate it to the transfer in cost or the transfer in materials. So that now the two can be assumed to have been started the same period, the cost to have been incurred the same period. If we had some cost last period for the opening work in progress, then we assume that it has been spent this period, even though in the books of accounts, in the cash flow, in the cash account, we are having it as a cost incurred in the previous period. But you are going to presume it has been spent in this period so that now we can have everything being uniform. It is a way of not distinguishing between what you have met at with a certain degree of a progress and what you are to start from zero. So we are just discrediting and we are not going to distinguish this. We assume that this work has been done starting from the same rate or percentage to maybe 100% should it be completed. But when it comes to the FIFO method, the opening work in progress and units transferred in this period maintain their identity and are accounted for separately. Opening work in progress enters the process first and will be assumed to be completed from opening work in progress and the units started and transferred in this period. The cost incurred will only be relayed to work computed this period. That is, only current cost will be considered for unit cost calculation. Now, this is what I mean by in the FIFO method, that the units that were done previously but were not completed, which are the units we should start this time. Therefore, we are going to work less. We should not mix these units with the units that we are going to do and complete from 0 to 100%. Now, for us to distinguish that, remember, when talk of the first in, first out, we are actually having a distinction and giving full identity to the units that we have found in this process that are halfway completed, and they are the ones we are calling the opening work in progress. We complete them first, then before we start the other units from zero. Now, assuming this way, assuming that there is opening work in progress of 200 units, and then there is transfer in units of, let's say 3,800. That means the total, this is total inputs is 4,000 units. Assuming that the transfer out, which is the output or either the finished goods, assuming that finished goods are let me have it here. Assuming finished goods, let's say, are 3,500, and we have a closing WIP of 500 units, then of course this is going to balance with 4,000. The treatment of now this shall be, if we are doing the weighted average method, then the finished goods shall be the same 3,500, while the closing work in progress WIP shall be the 500. Now, looking at what I have presented here, this tells you that we have lost identity of these 200 units on our output. We can't tell whether they form part of the finished goods or they form part of the closing work in progress. So we just concentrate with the physical units input and output, which is still 4,000 here. So we lose control, we lose identity of these 200 units and the trace or the track of these 200 units. That is the behavior of the weighted average. Even if we had the cost, we still would have the same, assuming that we have the cost of opening WIP. Let's say the cost of opening WIP is give it 20,000, and there is now the transfer in cost. Let's say the transfer in cost is 100, not even 100, we can have it as 600,000, while let's say we have the process cost. So this is process. Assume this is process 2. So we have process 2 cost. So assuming that we are spending another like 480,000 for this in this period, then if you are doing using, let's say all this I'm doing using weighted average method, then because we do not regard these 200 with their identity, we combine them even in our final output, then even the cost of it, which is 20,000, we are going to assume it has been spent in this period, and therefore we are going to add it, and we are going to have a cost here of, this is 1.1 million. So we'll say that 1.1 million has been used to process the 4,000 units, even though this closing work in progress may be at a percentage, degree of completion. So in that case, if assuming that this closing work in progress is complete, only, let's say, should I say complete like 60%, that means the units we can say here are actually 300 units. So that means our equivalent units, these now are equivalent units, they'll actually be 3,800. So if we want to get the CPU, then we'll take the whole of 1,100,000, we divide by the 3,800. There is nowhere we have kept track of these 200 units. That's my concern. We never kept track of the 200 units, and it's like saying that we have assumed we have brought them in this time together with the 3,800, and that's how we have treated them. We have not regarded their completion rate. That is how we do for the weighted average method. But if it is FIFO, then if we are doing a process, this is a FIFO.
Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to get yourself a copy of our professionally prepared study text and revision partners. Visit our shop along Tom Boyer Street, Pioneer House, 3rd floor, opposite Fire Station.